Could a samurai with a katana beat a musketeer with a rapier by Skallagrim? I'm actually very interested in this question.
The katana and rapier are opposing forces. Fire and water, cat and dog, the internet and rational discourse.
Yeah.
Okay, not that incompatible. But who would win? I've already said my piece about these hypothetical who would win.
Okay, that was a really good way he actually went into high
But
guard
who
though. So really good draw. But look how he goes draws and goes into high guard.
would win? I've already said my piece
That was, as somebody that does SCA Rapier, that was very pleasing to watch. Thank you, Skallagrim.
about these hypothetical who would win duels and which weapon is better. And as you know, it depends primarily on the user's skill.
Yeah.
But of course, fighting style and weapons still matters. And in this case, it really kind of is like fire and water. Right now, the only katana I have is in Shirasaya mount, which means basically it's unfinished. It's
Right.
really intended just for storage. Although in this case, it's also essentially a sword cane kind of hidden. But either way, for demonstration, it'll do. All right, setting up the
sense.
katana on forward-facing guard, which is what you'd want against a sword like this. We'll get back to that in a moment. I want to control the opponent's blade past the center line so I can push it aside and make sure it can't threaten me. Now,
God, I'm having, my brain is reacting because I've seen so many of these thrusts in SCA. So he's doing it absolutely correct. So he's trying to push that center line, but notice how he's twisting his hand, right?
past the center
Notice how he twists it, knuckles down. He twists his wrist to the right, knuckles down. Therefore, the strong of his blade, right? Move your arm up and down, right? So like you have your arm behind your head, you throw your arm forward, your elbow's bending, right? And you're moving down, right? That's the strong of your blade because your blade is going down in that direction, where the weak of your blade would be trying to bring your blade up in the opposite direction. So this actually serves a couple different purposes. One, because the sword itself here, it's the strong part of the blade, right? It's the stoutest part of the blade nearest your hand, has the most leverage, whereas on the opponent, that is towards the weaker part of their blade, right? It's further out from them, not as much leverage, right? Further away from their hands. Very good actual into, I believe that's second. I think first is top, second is knuckles down, third is straight on like he was before, and I think fourth is knuckles up to the left.
line so I can push it aside and make sure it can't threaten me. Now, if I try to obtain a favorable bind and the opponent holds against it, turns the edge against it and just resists, so I can't actually get that, then I would disengage
That's Cavazione.
and push the other side.
Cavazione,
So I
wait a
let the
second.
opponent go in the direction he wants to instead of allowing him to control my blade. So I slip under, and now I'm pushing in the direction that he's already going. If the opponent gets a little too eager and overcommits when pushing on the blade, it gets even worse. That's assuming a good reaction time with the rapier, of course. By the way, there's a bit of irony here in that I'm demonstrating Italian techniques with a Spanish rapier. Spanish rapier fencing is very different in its mechanics and tactics, but I'm just not familiar enough with it. What would the fighter with a katana try to do? It's pretty limited what I can say about it because I'm not trained in traditional Japanese swordsmanship. But here are some speculative ideas. So for one, I'm thinking you probably don't really want to be in any guard other than this. Because if you're here, it's way too easy for the rapier to quickly thrust.
I mean, if you have like a larger sword, right? Like an Odachi, right? I mean, maybe. I mean, I know we see the Kensei from For Honor do it a lot. But yeah, as far as Japanese swordsmanship, that's not something that I'm really a trained specialist on. Like, this is actually really interesting to look at from the Japanese sword perspective. I also like that I can see his ring light in the back. It kind of reminds me of like some like Dark Souls 3, like Kiln of the First Flame, right? Kind of thing, right? I kind of like it, actually. I kind of want him to keep it.
In while being at a distance where you can't even reach them.
月見えないかもね。
Yeah.
怖い怖い怖い。
Even with the blade forward, it can be difficult to react in time. Here's something to point out though. In sparring, we usually stop when a hit is landed. In real combat, a rapier thrust may be lethal, but not necessarily immediately incapacitating.
No.
Which is why it's so important to bind and control the opponent's blade for a covered thrust like I showed earlier. Due to the reach, I'll show you that in a moment, there's not too much you can do to threaten them directly here either, but the advantage here is this blade has a lot more mass than the rapier, especially this type.
Good God, you'll
of
have
rapier.
leverage.
So what you would want to do is cover yourself and try to get a bind, basically similar to what the rapier fighter is trying to do. So as soon as you've got this, you can now move in and push it down and then move in for a cut. Speed is crucial here. You have to overbind and close in more quickly than the opponent can create space and clear the point.
Right.
If you're already in a forward-facing guard and you just do this, just a very slight beat, and then move in, you might be able to pull it off, but definitely not from a guard like this to come.
No, the issue with holding your, and this is, I deal with this not only with longsword, I also deal with this in shield, also deal with this in single point when I use rapier, right? If you're holding your sword back, right? Sorry for the pause champ there. So if you're holding your sword back here, right? Sure, I guess you could hypothetically move it across your body, like say move both your hands across the x-axis across the stream. So instead of being on his right side, I'll be on his left side, right? Sure, you could do something like that hypothetically as a defensive maneuver, but realistically, where is your sword not pointing? At your opponent. Who's not threatened? Your opponent. Unless you're baiting them in, right? Or have something very specific you're trying to do. They have a pointy bit pointed at you, and you do not have a pointy bit pointed at them. So you get someone like me who is very prone to just walking at people, walking through people, which I hear is very German. Like, I get a shield on, and I'm just like, I'm just going to walk at you. And they're like, oh, you can't do, oh, he can do that. He can just walk, right? Like, I get out of stance and walk at people. And more often than not, it has oddly positive results. So, like, it comes down to just, like, yeah, you want to make sure your opponent's threatened. Like, you want to, this, I would say, you are trying to bait them into doing something so you may react, so they can react to it. Likewise, like I was mentioning, coming in and hitting the blade, like doing a quick tap and then coming in, you are forcing a response from them by hitting the blade. Do they try to cavazione? Do they try to disengage? Do they try to back up? Do they try to commit, right? You are forcing an engagement there by moving into tempo, moving into range, right?
To come in with a big cut like that because it's just way too exposed. It's too easy for the rapier user to deny contact and then just threaten you as you expose yourself and move in like this. If you deliver a wide cut, this is completely open. So you would have to keep it pretty tight and make sure that you don't expose yourself. One good tactic I can see would be to bait a thrust. So maybe you lower your sword a little bit or kind of deliberately put it off center a little bit, not too.
So from that stance right there, what does that tell you? Say you're using the rapier in this situation. Man, his forehead's a real big target, right? Obviously, he's going to be wearing a mask, right? Reasonably, because, you know, safety first, right? Man, his guard's pretty low. I'm going to try to boink his head. I'm going to try to boink his left shoulder, right? Immediately are things that can come to mind when you're in the situation, right? This treats as an invitation. This image, come on, hit my left shoulder. Try and hit my left shoulder. Let's see. And if your concentration wanes, yeah, they can come in. They can bop you on the forehead, bop you on the shoulder. But if you have that concentration, you can bait that thrust. You can bait that invitation. You can use that as an invitation for them to come into measure, do your response, and then, you know, riposte at them or come at them, right? Come with that counterattack.
Too much
follow-up.
To not telegraph your intention. But just let it dip a little bit and expect the thrust coming in here. And when it does, you can quickly catch it on the bottom half of your blade, and then displace it and cut. Okay, so reach. The reach difference between these two is enormous.
Yeah.
First off, you can see that the rapier has a significantly longer blade to begin with. And then to show you the actual reach difference, so this is the target. With the rapier, if I want to just about touch it, I'm over here. The katana with two hands is still pretty far away from.
I actually like that he did the opacity for this, actually. That's actually a really good trick to do that. I don't really know how you do it other than maybe a side-by-side, but the opacity overlay to do this, I think was actually a really good call because it showcases, and we deal with this in SEA a lot, right? Where, okay, where's measure, though? You want to be outside of where your blades are touching each other. So if the where his rapier is touching, right, is me, and I'm reaching out my rapier and I'm touching him, okay, we're in measure. We can hit each other. So you want to kind of start from outside measure, right? And then you come into measure, and that's when you have your, you know, your exchange. So notice that reasonably, you don't have that range. Range can win you battles, but is not necessarily the only factor that will win you a fight. If I have my buddy who is very skilled in regards to Kama, right? The sickles, right? Little hand sickles. And I had my claymore, right? If he closes that gap, that all the reach in the world isn't gonna do me it's not gonna do me anything, right? It's not gonna work. It's not gonna do anything. So you have to, even though you have the range, you have to capitalize on that. You have to work on that. You have to engage, and you have to continue with that.
Pretty far away from that. If I use one hand, I can bring it forward a little bit, but it's
still not measure.
It still can't reach. You have to actually be close enough that the thrust is effective, enough to reach internal organs. So it's probably more like this, which is still not enough for the katana to reach with two hands. And with one hand, you can just barely get there. There are techniques like the Pasata Soto, which maximizes reach combined with evasive action, but it's very committed. If this fails, it's slow to recover from. Cutting with a rapier, well, this particular type here is pretty lousy at cutting, just because it has a really narrow blade. This blade, even though it's fairly narrow as well, hits noticeably harder. I know from sparring that you get a pretty substantial whack. Because it's so long and because it keeps tapering, you can't cut with just a tip. This is just not effective. So you have to be quite a bit further down. In fact, the sweet spot seems to be about here. So we're talking this kind of reach. At that distance, the katana can just about reach with two hands for a shallow tip cut. And with one hand, is quite a good cut, really. These two are basically polar opposites. If you wanted to pretty much reverse a sword design, you would come up with something fairly close to this. Now, it would depend on the individual sword. There are wider rapiers, there are shorter blades, there are katanas with somewhat longer blades. You'll see heavier and lighter ones, etc., etc. But this is just about as extreme as it gets. One sword's advantage is the other sword's disadvantage. As said, the rapier has enormous reach and a highly effective thrust. The katana has limited reach, but a highly effective cut. This narrow-bladed rapier in particular is extremely light and gives you a lot of tip control. You can easily make a small circle to disengage and thrust to just about any opening very quickly. This is pretty much the opposite.
So this isn't an over-exaggeration. Like, that's not an over-exaggeration. Tip play, and I'm gonna call it that. Like, I'm not gonna word that differently. Tip play in rapier is 100% a thing, right? Look how he's moving it. Imagine if I had a rapier pointed at him too, right? Imagine, right?
And thrust to just about any opening very quickly. This is pretty much the opposite.
Tip play is 100% a thing. Like, these are things that happen. These are things to consider, especially with rapier v rapier. Like, you can have them, play peekaboo with their tip, and then you cavazione. Oh, but they counter cavazione you, so now you have to respond to that, but they're already in your throat. Rapier is such a lightning fast format, and I like it, especially being at a handicap that I am, because I'll use longsword and shield. I don't go to win. I go to have fun. I go to learn things. I go to relearn things that I've forgotten or am rusty at. If I learn something new every day, which is why I like doing React content in a lot of aspects, right? If I learn something new every day, I consider that a win. Well, it's utterly boring otherwise.
It's all about the cut. It can thrust, of course, and reasonably well, but overall this is much more cut-centric and you can work better up close. If you're basically at almost grappling distance, there is still plenty you can do with this. You can slice up close, you can lever the opponent's blade, you can pretty easily use the other hand for support. Well, this is very awkward up close. If the opponent gets past the point and you're unable to disengage and bring it back into action, you have a problem. Like, yes, you can try to grab the blade and work with it.
I actually really like his gloves. Skallagrim, where did you get your gloves? They kind of look like the Darth Vader gloves that the Dawn of my SCA group has. I absolutely love these gloves. If anyone knows what these gloves are, please send me that link, or please send me where I can buy these, because these look incredible and I love them. They do look like Darth Vader gloves, honestly. Just the tip play sounds naughty. Oh, my sweet summer child. Oh, the absolute just degeneracy of. Oh, there's so much. There's so much that I'm not even gonna unpack that there. SCA HEMA people out there, you know. It's not say so.
Work with it this way. You can try to strike with the guard. This would be quite painful.
You could,
but this is not where you want to be in general. So with the rapier, you want to keep your distance and threaten with the point and prevent the opponent from moving in. And with the katana, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to close the distance as quickly as possible to get past that point, which is so dangerous. So this would be a high-risk situation. An unarmored duel between a rapierist and a katana user would favor...
Those are actually really good ribbon cuts, actually.
Unarmored duel between a rapierist and a katana user would favor the rapier at the beginning,
right?
But it could quickly turn to a 180, and now the rapier user is at high risk.
I used to
think that a two-handed sword can generally break the block of a single-handed sword, but that's only if you do it incorrectly. Their complex hilt gives you the hand protection to comfortably parry low on the blade and resist even a powerful cut with two hands.
Remember, the longsword synonymous with the like 16th century Europe, right? Rapier, the synonymous with the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, right, of Europe, right? 17th century, I would argue, right? And obviously there's some historians and some scholars in here that can, kind of be able to correct me if I'm wrong on that, or be able to offer more insight into that. But what I'm trying to get at is, it's almost like the rapier was designed as an evolution and could combat the longsword if needed. It's almost like the rapier is the evolution of the longsword in some aspects, right? Very interesting.
I think the side sword here would be a better match.
I love that.
When it comes to blade length, it still has a little bit on the katana, slightly longer. And again, because you're fighting with one hand in a more bladed stance, you have more reach. This is a much more substantial blade. It can cut very well, for one. And it's also not as easy to manipulate because the lever isn't quite as long. That works against you, and there's just more mass here. And this makes for a very strong parry. There's no need for a big movement. You don't need to meet the opponent's blade with your own blade. That is a way to do it, but if you have to quickly respond, essentially this is all you need. Just close the line, and it's going to hit here or here, and then it's going to be stopped by this large complex hilt. Your hand is essentially completely safe from cuts. Thrusts could still target it. So I'm thinking a duel between a side sword like this and a katana would probably go on for longer than between a narrow blade rapier and a katana. Just because it's not as risky for both of them. There's a little bit more defense. And of course, you can have something in between like this that gives you enormous reach due to the very long blade, but the blade is wide enough to also be quite good at cutting. At the disadvantage that it's quite a bit heavier and not as nimble as the other option. Now, what if you swapped them? Let's say you had an unarmored duel between a musketeer and a samurai, and you made them swap weapons. This would be a disaster. It would be extremely awkward for both of them because their fighting style is just not suited to what this is. So if I had to fight with the katana, with a rapier style, so now I don't have the reach I need, but worse, the balance is all wrong. For a rapier to really be effective, you need most of the mass in the hilt. So
Musashi actually goes about this in the Five Rings, the passage, and we've gone over this, so I'm not going to go over too much into it, but the path of a blade, that doesn't want to stab. It can stab. It doesn't want to move like a rapier. Why is that? Well, the way it's shaped, the way that it wants to move, the path the blade wants to take is a very slicing and cutting approach, right? Whereas a rapier, absolutely, you have those little tip cuts that you can do, and they're supposed to be sharp and stuff like that, right? But when it comes to a rapier, right, it wants to channel all of that momentum, all the energy into that single point for a thrust. It's like why a kukri is really good at hacking things, right? The way that it is designed it is designed to hack. That is the path that blade wants to take. So it's always interesting, actually, how much Musashi keeps popping up, especially just like, it's one of those things that like, I've read that line once like 2 years ago, and I just see it consistently. So if you haven't read the Five Rings, I definitely recommend giving it your attention.
That the point is comparatively light. You can kind of do it here because the long handle does help counterbalance it a little bit, but it's so much more awkward, and the curve is not really suitable for the kind of work that you normally do with a rapier. How would the samurai use a rapier? Well, a video was put up on the Let's Ask Seki Sensei channel just a while ago. I'm a little bit late to the party, but let's take a look at how it went briefly.
I actually really like Seki Sensei's channel. I don't know if they're okay with React content or not. I still am not sure. I did reach out, but I'm just, making sure that I'm being respectful towards other creators, making sure that, being as transformative as I can, but also making sure creators have the ability to chime in and say, counter should they not want that React content.
Some people said they were disappointed by how little this resembles a rapier, which is true. It's really not all that similar, but what are they supposed to do? If they can't get an actual rapier, then this is the closest approximation.
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
That is actually a rapier sidesword and broadsword technique as well. So the concept is, as the opponent thrusts, you have superior leverage because you're binding high up on their blade, and you can force the overbind like this. It works best when the bind happens high up on their blade, which is known as the weak, and lower on your blade, which is the strong, just for...
Thank you, Skallagrim, for citing the upper, weaker, and lower, stronger portions of the blade. I'm going to take that Kip W for people that, that are just like, what are you talking about, Kip? That's not how that works. That's exactly how that works. Thank you, Skallagrim. Thank you for being a citation.
Mechanical reasons. This entire circular movement is not common with a rapier.
That's interesting, though.
Typically, circular movements are used for disengaging, where you change from one side of the opponent's blade to the other and then strongly bind and thrust. Now, I'm not familiar with every rapier or sidesword style, and there are significant differences. Maybe there are sources that use this kind of circular movement. That wouldn't be out of place at all.
I actually really like that, though. That's actually kind of sexy because he does the it's not an expel, right? But he smacks it on the side to be able to stop that momentum and then bounces back to go for the hit. That's actually really cool. I love that. Right? So he stops all the momentum right there. His opponent is now all the way out in left field, right? And now he's poised to come down for a strike.
That
right? I love that. That was really cool.
Wouldn't be out of place at all. A beat followed by a countercut.
Yeah,
That's more of a side sword thing than rapier, but there is some overlap.
Yeah.
That you would see in rapier fencing, just with a smaller circle. He's doing a pretty large circle, which, if the balance isn't as far back as with a rapier, that's what you end up doing because it's much easier to do small circles with this kind of backward weighted balance.
I do think that there is that small, unfortunate corner of the internet that is going to be like, he's moving wrong. So here's the thing, right? Looking at Seki Sensei, right? Back to their channel 4, I think they're great. And even then, like, let's take this into without knowing anything about them, right? Without knowing anything. Katana Swordmaster, how would they fight with a rapier? The way that this is being presented to me is that they have no prior understanding or no prior experience using rapier fighting, rapier techniques, or fighting with a rapier, or looking up rapier manuals, right? So if this is a blind react, wink wink, to a Katana Swordmaster fighting with a rapier, and this is how organically they're getting to these things, that's impressive. The community that is just like, oh, well, this is incorrect, or they're doing... Look, like, realistically, that's like if you gave me a Zweihander and said, Kip, figure this out. Or if you gave me a French Saber, right? Figure it out. Or if somebody gave me a Shaitak intervention, right? Hey, Kip, figure it out. You know how other weapons platforms works. You'll figure it out, right? Sure, I might eventually figure it out. Probably will. But it's not going to be, you know, watching someone that's their platform, right? And what I do, right, in tandem with firearms content, right? Hand somebody a Beretta. Hey, cool, take that down. What's the takedown system? Right? If they're used to Glocks, if they're used to SIG, if they're used to 1911s, right? You see how, if it's not their specialty, but they still can get there anyways, that's still pretty impressive because that shows that their ability to intake that information and then roll with that information is so much higher than other people's. I have nothing but respect for just getting to this point.
タイミングでつくとかね。
Yeah.
ついて
And that's, of course, where the blade length comes in handy,
Right.
and particularly also the stance. With the rapier, you just have more reach. So you are able to evade the cut, and you're still within your own measure. You can still thrust to the arms or maybe even to the body without being exposed.
月見えないかもね。
Yeah.
怖い怖い怖い。
That's very true. Thrusts are hard to see coming.
Yeah.
You can see the footwork, you can see when somebody's approaching, but when the point is aimed at your face and goes straight forward, it's pretty difficult to see exactly where
Yeah.
it is, just because the depth perception is much more challenging.
Oh, they'll ding you.
見えないから
I've gotten
あ
dinged
んま
by
りね
thrusts I never saw
大きい
coming.
動作で打たない方がいい
Yes.
だからこっちもスキッ
Absolutely.
と小切りしか使えない。
I think those are techniques that would work better with a side sword rather than a rapier.
Okay.
This,
Right.
I think, would be extremely awkward in the hands of someone who is trained to use a katana but not a rapier. So I think both would be extremely out of their element. Of course, both have the fundamentals. You know, footwork, timing, distance management. But the distance management is all screwed because they're not used to this length. Who would have the better chance if they were to swap weapons? I think it would be quite likely that both injure each other and just don't have a whole lot of success.
Is that a Schlager blade on that piece? That almost looks like a Schlager blade from how from the cup hilt, how it comes out. So Schlager blades aren't like actual, or they're just a different kind of blade, right? They're more, I think it's like oval shaped, right? Rather than, you know, what you would assume an actual blade would be. A lot of people in SCA in my chapter actually really like Schlager blades. I also like the weight behind a lot of them. So I'd be very interested to know if that's actually a Schlager blade in the piece he has in his hand.
Each would know how to counter the weapon that the opponent uses because that's what they're familiar with, but they wouldn't have the tools to counter it effectively. In an unarmored duel between Musketeer and Samurai, who would win? Again, that depends a lot on the individual skill. If we assume peak human fitness and both equally experienced, equal in whatever kind of skill rating you would come up with, it might be a 50-50 chance, or it might be slightly in favor of the rapier. In an open field, it would be pretty difficult to get past the rapier blade.
Right.
And the rapier would shut down a lot of tactics and attacks. Now, if we're talking rapier or side sword with a dagger, so that each fighter is using both hands,
Yes,
this
dagger, 2
would
point.
do a lot to compensate for the weaknesses that the rapier has, because
Well, and alternatively as well, you can take something like was it Niten Ichiryu, Musashi's style, right? 2 paths, 1 blade, or sorry, 2 blades, 1 path, right? And you know, you have your wakizashi, right, in tandem with your katana, right? Maybe you're able to engage their rapier with your offhand, right? So now we're getting into the realm of films we're adding a 2 point for rapier. What about adding a 2 point for the katana, right? What about, because it did exist, right? We had dual wielding katanas. We had, smaller wakizashi. Tanto, as far as I'm aware, was more kind of ceremonial. I think that was the one for seppuku actually as well. But like, I mean, you see how adding a single variable has a cascading effect, and that's why I love talking about combat.
now suddenly you're not defenseless up close. Now, of course, the samurai could also grab a wakizashi or a tanto.
There you go.
But in doing so, you would give up a lot of the advantages. And of course, it would mean that both the samurai's hands are exposed to cuts and thrusts, while the musketeer's hands are almost entirely unavailable as targets. If, however, we're talking a self-defense situation on the street, say the two bump into each other in a dark alley, and the samurai doesn't take kindly to that, and immediately draws and cuts from the scabbard, the musketeer is kind of screwed. This is not a quick draw weapon. It's worn quite low to even be able to draw it, but it's
a good
not
draw, good
fast.
draw.
So probably the best chance would be to try to block with the rapier drawn halfway, at which point you can't use it yet and you're very susceptible to grappling. So I don't think that would go well for the Musketeer. If both met on the battlefield fully armored, that would be a completely different situation, and they probably wouldn't even be using those swords. No. The Musketeer would definitely not be using a rapier with a narrow blade. It would be either a military rapier with a much stouter blade or a side sword. And for both, it would be a backup weapon anyway. They would be fighting primarily with polearms or simply, you know, shoot each other with muskets.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. Big shout out to my patrons and YouTube members. You folks help out a lot. And there's going to be an ad-free extended edit of this video for you to check out your feed. And thanks for watching. Take care.
So what I got from the ending of that is, cool story, bro. Cool sword you got there. But I have this gun. I see you too have a cool sword. But I got this gun. The ending of that actually is great. I love that. No, I think there was a lot that came out to this. There was a lot of discussionary, and I do think that it can be a toss-up. It just depends on the skill level, depends on the situation. There's a lot of factors to really look into here, and I mean, honestly, I could see it being a toss-up either way. It depends on the skill level, fitness level, situation, right? Back alley is going to be much different than open fields. Going to be much different than, you know, fighting on, say, hostile terrain. Hostile terrain being like, you know, potholes, stuff like that. You know, uneven ground, sand even. I don't like sand. It's coarse, it's grainy, it's everywhere. But thank you, Skallagrim, for another excellent video. I really did enjoy this. This was an excellent piece to react to and to watch. And, you know, I absolutely love this. This is a great talking point, and helps me as well going into SCA and stuff like that every Wednesday. Is kind of just solidifying knowledge that I don't often get to use outside of the Wednesdays that I do go to SCA. So it's been interesting. If you are interested in the original video or you're interested in Skallagrim, down in the description below, you will see a link to the original video and his channel. I absolutely recommend that you go ahead and check them out. And thank you everyone for watching. I really do appreciate it. See you all in the next one.